So, what was motivating you to not only write a book about this, but actually a systematic theology?
Well, I'm a systematic theologian, but it basically came out of just a private conversation. I teach at a place called Trinity School for Ministry. Fellow professor there, a woman who taught pastoral theology named Martha Giltonen, was an ordained Anglican priest, had served in Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts for a number of years and here in Pittsburgh. And she had been getting a lot of pushback about being a woman priest, including among some of the students. She asked me if I would write something. I have a blog, and I said, well, yes, but one, I'm a layperson, not really it is my concern in the sense that I belong to the church, but I'm probably not the best person to be speaking to this, and I'm not a woman. So I wanted her to do it, and she kept pointing out to me, well, my area is pastoral theology. I teach, how to do things. You're a systematic theologian. You have background in both evangelical and Catholic theology. So I said, well, I'll write you some essays. And what happened, I began writing essays and it kept going and going. And at a certain point, I realized I had written enough to become a book. And so edited everything, put it together, and submitted it to a number of publishers. And a year or so ago, Baylor University Press decided to publish it.
That's awesome. Well, I think it's wonderful, and I think it's super important that men are writing about this, because it's important. Because sometimes the fact that a woman's writing about it, some men will just dismiss it because of this whole issue.
Yeah, that's true. It is interesting that in terms of the literature that has been written, most of it actually has been written by men. Many people, but for example, the biblical commentaries, particularly, most of the really good discussion of the New Testament, what the New Testament says about the relationships between men and women, is found not in books on or about women's studies or women's ordinations, but by biblical scholars. For example, commentaries on 1 Corinthians by Anthony Thistleton. Wonderful book on women by Richard Bauckham. But you have to be looking particularly in New Testament studies where you're reading a commentary on 1 Corinthians, and then someone like Anthony Thistleton will have a long discussion of what Paul says about headship. Another well-known New Testament scholar, Methodist scholar in this country, named Ben Witherington III. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he teaches at Asbury, very well known. And his doctoral dissertation was on, ended up being published as two books. One was on women, Jesus and women, and then the second half of the dissertation was on women in the New Testament. And so it's a lot of the material has been written by men, but it is an issue that affects men and women.
Yeah, I'm glad you're raising those different commentators because, since I mentioned, because of my early upbringing in very, very conservative circles, a lot of my Bible study tools, commentaries, definitely leaned towards, men are the head. They are the ones who should be leading churches. And so whenever I would go to, I'm reading, 1 Timothy or 1 Corinthians, those passages that talk about headship of the men, especially in maybe in a church realm, all the commentators, of course, are reaffirming that.
Right.
And so it's important, I think, to have a diversity of thought on these passages.
Yeah, and that's, one of the interesting things is among evangelicals, and I'm using the word in the broadest sense, particularly I'm talking about American evangelicals, they're familiar with the conversation that has been initiated by complementarians, but they're not necessarily so familiar. And I'm actually have been somewhat surprised at some of the conversations I've had when I keep hearing things that were being, 20, 30 years ago, the same things being repeated over and over again. And it's like, have you not read, current commentaries on 1 Corinthians? Or do you know the names of Ben Witherington or Anthony Thistleton or a guy named Philip Payne, who has written a wonderful book on Paul? And there is a kind of just an unawareness that these issues have been addressed, I think.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video clip from the Delgado Podcast. To get more videos like this, simply subscribe here on YouTube. You can also download the full episode of each show on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your favorite podcast player. Take care.